was standing at a pharmacy counter, trying not to cry, when a stranger paid my father's medical bill. $347. I thought it was a pity. I didn't know yet that every person in that room was afraid of him. I didn't know his name. I didn't know he owned half the city. And I definitely didn't know that accepting that money would pull me, and my dying father, into a war we never agreed to be part of. This is the story of the debt that followed. The pharmacy counter felt like a courtroom bench. I stood there with my father's prescription clutched in my sweating palm, watching the pharmacist's face shift from professional courtesy to cold dismissal. "That'll be $347, she said, her voice flat as a slammed door. My throat closed. I had $162 in my account. Rent was already 2 weeks late. The electric company had sent the final notice yesterday, printed in aggressive red letters that seemed to scream my failure from the kitchen table. Can I pay half now?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. "He needs these tonight. His heart. Store policy. Full payment up front." She was already turning away, dismissing me like trash she'd swept into a corner. Behind me the line grew restless. I heard whispers, felt eyes drilling into my back. My uniform from the care facility still smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. I'd come straight from a double shift, 12 hours of washing bodies and changing sheets for $8 an hour, and it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I didn't notice him at first. The man in the dark coat standing 3 people back in line, hands in his pockets, face calm as still water. But everyone else noticed him. The teenager behind me stepped backward, creating space that hadn't been there before. The woman checking her phone went rigid, her thumb frozen mid-scroll. Even the pharmacist's assistant, restocking shelves near the counter, suddenly found urgent business in the back room. He wasn't tall enough to dominate the space by height alone, wasn't loud or threatening. He just stood there, patient as a stone, and the entire pharmacy rearranged itself around him like iron filings near a magnet. His eyes were dark brown, almost black in the fluorescent lighting. They weren't looking at me yet. They were looking past me, through the glass partition where the pharmacist had disappeared to help another customer, leaving me stranded at the counter with my father's prescription and my empty wallet. I felt my face burning. 28 years old and standing in a pharmacy I couldn't afford, wearing a stained uniform that announced my poverty to everyone watching. My father was home alone, his chest tight, his pills running out. And I had nothing. "Step aside, please." His voice cut through my spiral of shame. Not harsh, not loud, but absolute. The kind of voice that had never been ignored in its life. I turned, confused, and found myself looking into those dark eyes. Up close, I could see the gray threading through his black hair, the lines around his mouth that suggested he smiled rarely and meant it less. "I'm not done," I started, but he was already moving past me, sliding a black credit card across the counter before the pharmacist could return. "The prescription," he said. Not to me. To the woman now hurrying back to the register, her face pale. "And anything else she needs." The pharmacist's hands shook as she processed the payment. $347 disappeared like smoke. She handed me the white paper bag without meeting my eyes, then practically threw his receipt at him. I stood frozen, the medication heavy in my hands. Around us, the pharmacy had gone silent. Even the overhead music seemed to have stopped, leaving only the hum of refrigerators and my thundering heartbeat. "I can't accept this," I said, but my fingers were already tightening around the bag. My father needed these pills. He needed them tonight. The man looked at me then, really looked, and something flickered in his expression. "You already have." He walked out before I could say anything else. The glass doors swung shut behind him, and the pharmacy exhaled like it had been holding its breath. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, laced with tension I didn't understand. I approached the counter again, my legs unsteady. Who was that? The pharmacist's face closed like a fist. "Your prescription is ready. You should go." "But I need to know, I have to pay him back." You don't pay back Dominic Ashford. The assistant had returned, her voice barely a whisper. The pharmacist shot her a look sharp enough to draw blood. You just stay out of his way. The name meant nothing to me. But the way she said it, the way the pharmacist grabbed her arm and pulled her into the back room with a hissed reprimand, told me everything I needed to know. I had just been saved by someone dangerous. Walking to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, but the parking lot was empty except for my rusted sedan and a sleek black car pulling away from the far corner. I sat in my driver's seat for 10 minutes, the medication bag in my lap, trying to understand what had just happened. My phone buzzed. Past due notice from the electric company. Reminder that my father's next cardiology appointment was in 2 weeks. No insurance. Payment required at time of service. I drove home through streets I'd known my whole life, and they felt different now. Like I'd crossed some invisible line I couldn't see. My father was asleep in his recliner when I got home, the television playing some old western at low volume. I watched his chest rise and fall, counted the breaths, measured them against the rhythm I'd memorized over the past 6 months since his diagnosis. I gave him his medication with water and applesauce, the way the hospice nurse had shown me. He swallowed obediently, his hands trembling as he held the cup. 72 years old and shrinking before my eyes. His body consuming itself from the inside out. "Where'd you get the money?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Don't worry about it, Maya." He fixed me with eyes that were still sharp despite everything else failing. "Where?" So I told him. About the pharmacy, the humiliation, the stranger who'd paid without asking. I didn't tell him the name, didn't tell him about the fear in everyone's faces. He was sick enough without that weight. He was quiet for a long time. His hands folded over the blanket covering his lap. Finally, 23 years ago, I was working security at Memorial Hospital. Night shift emergency entrance. A woman came in bleeding, a teenager with her. Gunshot wound, both of them terrified. I sat down, ice forming in my stomach. I didn't call the police. I got them a doctor instead. The girl lived. He looked at me, his eyes wet. Her name was Isabella Ashford. The car appeared outside our apartment the next morning. Black, expensive, windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. It sat across the street like a threat or a promise. I couldn't tell which. I left for my shift at the care facility at 6. And the car followed me. Not close, not obvious, just there. At every light, every turn, maintaining distance but never disappearing. At work, I tried to focus on my residents. Mrs. Patterson needed her insulin. Mr. Gomez had been calling for his daughter all night, forgetting again that she'd died 3 years ago. I moved through the rooms on autopilot, checking vitals, changing sheets, pretending my hands weren't shaking. During lunch break, I called my father. "There's a car outside the apartment." "I know. I saw it." "Dad, what did you do? What did helping that girl mean?" "It means her brother owns half this city now." His voice was calm, resigned. "And apparently he remembers." I looked out the break room window. The parking lot was visible from here, and yes, there it was. The black car. Waiting. "He's watching me," I said. "He's having you protected." My father coughed, a wet, rattling sound that scared me more than the car ever could. "There's a difference." The man in the gray suit appeared at the care facility 3 days later. He found me in the laundry room, where I was changing the soiled sheets from the night shift, my hands red from hot water and cheap detergent. "Miss Torres." Not a question. He knew my name, had probably known everything about me before he walked through the door. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Ashford." I kept folding sheets, my back straight. "Tell Mr. Ashford thank you, but I don't need anything else. That's not what this is about." He set a folder on the folding table, manila and unmarked. "We've become aware of certain vulnerabilities in your situation. Your landlord, Mr. Castellano, has connections to the Moretti family. They've been watching you since the pharmacy incident." The sheet in my hand slipped. "Why would they watch me?" Because Dominic Ashford paid your bill. Because your father once helped his sister. Because in our world, mercy creates obligation, and obligation creates risk. His voice was neutral, reciting facts. The Morettas will use that against him if they can. Which means they'll use you. I didn't ask for any of this. No one asks. He pushed the folder toward me. But it's happening anyway. You have two choices. You can stay here unprotected and hope they lose interest. Or you can accept accommodation in a secure location until this situation resolves. I stared at the folder. Accommodation. A place to live. For you and your father. Full security medical care arranged. He paused. No cost. No strings. Everything has strings, I wanted to say. But I thought of my father alone in that apartment, of Mr. Castellano who owned our building and apparently had mob connections, of the black car that followed me everywhere now. The penthouse occupied the top floor of a building I'd only ever seen from the outside, the kind of place where doormen wore better suits than doctors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire downtown, the city spread out like scattered diamonds under the afternoon sun. My father sat in a leather chair near the window, oxygen tank beside him, looking smaller than ever against the scale of our new cage. Because that's what it was, no matter how beautiful. Cage with a view. Bedroom through there, the gray-suited man. His name was Patterson, he'd finally told me, gestured down a hallway. Medical equipment arriving this evening. Nurse on call 24 hours. Kitchen fully stocked. I walked through rooms that cost more than I'd earn in a decade. Marble bathrooms. A kitchen with appliances I didn't recognize. Everything clean, everything perfect, everything monitored by cameras I could see and probably more I couldn't. How long? Yes. Until it's safe. How will we know when it's safe? Patterson's expression didn't change. Mr. Ashford will let you know. After he left, I sat on the edge of a bed that probably cost $5,000 and put my head in my hands. My father's pills were in the bathroom, arranged in a dosage organizer by someone who'd known exactly what he needed. Our clothes had been moved from the apartment. Even my mother's photo, the one I kept on my nightstand, sat on the dresser in a new frame. They'd been in our home, in our things, knowing everything, arranging everything, moving us like pieces on a board we couldn't see. 3 days passed. I didn't go to work. Patterson had called them, explained I had a family emergency, arranged unpaid leave. My father's nurse arrived every morning at 8, a quiet woman named Angela who checked his vitals and adjusted his medications with professional efficiency. We ate meals we didn't cook, watched television on a screen larger than my childhood bedroom, slept in beds that felt like clouds. And the entire time I felt the walls closing in. On the 4th day, Dominic Ashford came to the penthouse himself. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard the lock disengage. No knock, no warning. He walked in like he owned the place, which I realized he probably did, wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Miss Torres. He nodded to me, then to my father, who'd fallen asleep in his chair again. I wanted to check on your accommodation. It's fine. I set down the coffee mug, my hands steady through sheer force of will. When can we go home? That depends on the Morettas. He moved to the window, looking out over the city like a king surveying his domain. They made contact yesterday. Testing boundaries. What does that mean? It means they went to your old apartment. Your landlord gave them the key. His voice was flat, factual. They took photographs. Left a message. Ice flooded my veins. What kind of message? He turned to look at me then, and for the first time I saw something almost human in his eyes. Almost. The kind that says they know where you were. And they'll wait until you come back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights off, watching the city glow below, thinking about the apartment I'd never see again. About the life I'd had 48 hours ago. Small and struggling but mine. My father woke around 3 in the morning, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. I held his hand while he oriented himself, reminded him where we were and why. He squeezed my fingers with what little strength he had left. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You saved someone's life. You don't apologize for that." "I never thought," he coughed, and I reached for the oxygen mask. "I never thought it would touch you." But that was the thing about kindness in a world built on violence. It didn't stay contained. It spread like ripples in water, reaching shores you never intended. Dawn, I made a decision. I found Patterson's number on the refrigerator. Of course they'd left it there, anticipating this, and called him. "I need to see Ashford." "He's not available." "I need to see him today." "Tell him I'm not asking." Took a breath. "Tell him we need to discuss terms." There was a pause. Then, "I'll arrange it." 2 hours later, Dominic Ashford stood in my borrowed living room again. His expression unreadable. "You wanted terms. I want to understand what I owe you." I faced him directly, chin up. "You paid for my father's medication. You moved us here. You're protecting us from people I didn't know existed. What's the price?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Your father gave my sister her life. That debt doesn't have a price. Everything has a price. Not this." He turned toward the door. "You owe me nothing, Miss Torres. You never did." The child appeared on the 7th day. A girl, maybe 9 years old, with dark hair in 2 braids and eyes that had seen too much too young. She sat in Patterson's office. Apparently this building had an entire floor of offices below our penthouse, coloring in a workbook, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear. "Who's that?" I asked Angela, the nurse, when I came down to pick up my father's new prescriptions. "Lily." Angela's voice softened. "Mr. Ashford's niece. Her parents died last year. Car accident. She was in the back seat." My stomach twisted. "She lives here. When she's not in school. He has full custody." I watched the girl through the glass wall, saw how her hand moved across the page with mechanical precision. No joy in it. Just something to do with her hands while the world moved around her. I knocked on the door frame. Patterson looked up, surprised, but Lily didn't. She kept coloring, purple crayon filling in what looked like a dragon's wing. "That's beautiful," I said. She didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. I sat down in the chair across from her. Patterson started to object, then seemed to think better of it. "I like dragons. Do you know why?" Silence. "Because they're not just scary. They're also protectors. They guard treasures. Keep people safe." I leaned forward slightly. "What's your dragon guarding?" Lily's hand stopped moving. She looked at me for the first time, her eyes wary and old. "Nothing. Dragons aren't real." "Maybe not. But the things they represent are." She went back to coloring, but I saw her shoulders relax just a fraction. I started coming down to Patterson's office every afternoon. Not to bother Lily. I knew better than to push, but just to be there. Sometimes I'd bring a book, or my father's crossword puzzles, or nothing at all. Just sitting, existing in the same space. On the 3rd afternoon she spoke first. "Why are you here?" I looked up from my book. "Where else would I be?" "Upstairs. With your dad." She was coloring again, green this time, filling in grass. "Patterson says your dad is sick." "He is. But he's sleeping right now. And I thought maybe you could use some company." "I don't need company." "Okay." I went back to my book. 10 minutes of silence. Then, "Do you know how to do fractions?" Closed the book. "Math homework." She pushed the workbook toward me. Her expression still guarded but less hostile. We worked through the problems together, me explaining, her listening with the intensity of someone who'd learned not to ask for help twice. When Patterson came to tell her it was time to go home, she gathered her things slowly. At the door she turned back. "Same time tomorrow. If you want." She nodded once, quick and sharp, then disappeared into the hallway. Patterson watched her go, then looked at me with something I couldn't quite name in his expression. "She doesn't talk to people," he said quietly. "Not since the accident." She talks to me. Yes. He adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. She does. Over the next 2 weeks, Lily and I developed a routine. She'd come to the office after school, we'd work on homework together. Then I'd tell her stories while she colored. Not fairy tales, she was too old for those, too jaded. Real stories about my grandmother, about growing up poor but loved, about the small rebellions that keep you human. She never asked about her parents, never mentioned the accident. But sometimes when I told stories about loss, I'd see her hands still on the page, see her listening with her whole body. My father noticed the change in me. "You're humming again," he said one evening. His voice weak but amused. "Haven't heard that in years." I was making him soup, the kitchen warm and bright. "Am I? Like you used to before your mother died. Before all of this." He gestured vaguely at his oxygen tank, at the penthouse, at everything. "This little girl is good for you. She reminds me why things matter." He smiled, his face pale but peaceful. "Good. Don't lose that." That night, after he'd gone to sleep, I found myself at the window again, looking out at the city. Somewhere down there, the Morettas were moving pieces on their board, planning whatever came next. And I was up here, suspended between the life I'd lost and the one I hadn't chosen, finding purpose in homework help and dragon drawings. It wasn't what I'd wanted. But maybe that didn't matter anymore. Patterson called me into his office 3 weeks after we'd arrived. Lily wasn't there, it was Saturday, she was with Ashford somewhere. The office felt empty without her workbooks scattered across the table. "We've finished the background investigation," he said, sliding another manila folder across his desk. "The one we started after the pharmacy incident." I didn't touch the folder. "Investigation into what?" "Your history. Specifically 3 years ago, when you were working at County General as a nursing assistant." My hands clenched in my lap. I knew exactly what he was about to say. "You found a teenage boy in the parking garage. Gunshot wound, bleeding out. Gang initiation gone wrong. The shooter was still there." Patterson's voice was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "You called 911, then stayed with the boy. Kept pressure on the wound. Talked to him for 11 minutes until the ambulance arrived. I did my job. The shooter had a gun on you the entire time. He told you to leave. You refused." Patterson opened the folder. The boy's name was Michael Ashford. Dominic's nephew. Lily's brother. The room spun. "What?" "He survived. Testified against the gang. Went into witness protection." Patterson pulled out a photo. A teenage boy with dark hair, Ashford's eyes. "He's in California now. Life. Because you stayed." I couldn't breathe. 3 years ago. A bleeding boy in a parking garage. A man with dead eyes telling me to walk away. I'd been so scared my legs barely held me. But I'd stayed anyway because leaving meant he'd die alone. "Dominic didn't know," Patterson continued. "Not until after the pharmacy. He was running surveillance on you afterward, trying to understand why your father mattered to him. He found the police report. Found the security footage. Found you. That's why he paid the bill." My voice sounded far away. "Not because of my father. Because of his nephew. Both." Patterson closed the folder. "Your family keeps saving Ashfords. He finds that significant." Dominic came to the penthouse that evening. I was ready for him, standing in the living room with my arms crossed, my father asleep in the bedroom where he couldn't overhear. "You knew," I said before he could speak. "When you paid that bill, you knew who I was. What I'd done." "Yes. Why didn't you say anything?" He moved to the window, his view, his kingdom. "Would you have accepted help if you knew?" "I don't know. You would have refused. You would have said it wasn't necessary, that you were just doing your job, that you didn't deserve special treatment." He turned to face me. "You would have been too proud to take what you needed." "You're damn right. And your father would have gone without his medication. You would have kept working double shifts, kept drowning, Kept sacrificing yourself because that's what you do. His voice was cold, factual. I've been watching you long enough to know. You save people even when it destroys you. That's not. Michael was 15 years old. The gang member holding that gun had killed 3 people. You had no training, no weapon, no protection. You stayed anyway. He stepped closer. You didn't do your job, Miss Torres. You did something extraordinary. And I don't forget the extraordinary. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him it wasn't like that I'd just been too scared to move, that staying wasn't heroism but paralysis. But the look in his eyes stopped me. He saw through the lies I told myself. Saw past the deflection to the truth I couldn't face. I'd chosen to stay. Chosen to risk everything for a dying stranger. Just like my father had 23 years ago. We were built the same, my father and I. Built to run toward bullets instead of away from them. The violence came closer the following week. Not to me, not directly, but close enough to feel its heat. A warehouse on the south side burned down. Moretti property, everyone knew it, though the news called it an electrical fire. 2 days later, one of Ashford's legitimate businesses, a restaurant downtown, got shut down by health inspectors who found violations that hadn't existed the day before. I saw it on the news, saw Ashford's face as he stood outside the restaurant, stone cold and terrifying. Saw the reporter ask if this was retaliation, and saw him walk away without answering. That night, he came to the penthouse late, nearly midnight. I was still awake, couldn't sleep anymore, kept thinking about warehouses burning and inspectors being bought and the game being played around us. He found me in the kitchen, making tea I wouldn't drink. You should be resting. So should you. He almost smiled. Almost. The Morettis are pushing. Testing how far they can go. And what will you do? Push back. Harder. He leaned against the counter, and for a moment, he looked exhausted. Not just tired. Exhausted in a way that went bone deep. It's how this works. Does it have to work that way? What do you mean? I set down the mug. They burned your warehouse. You'll burn theirs. They shut down your restaurant. You'll shut down 3 of theirs. Back and forth until someone dies or everyone's destroyed. I looked at him. Is that really the only option? It's the language they understand. Maybe. But it's also the language that killed Lily's parents. His face went carefully blank. That was an accident. Was it? Or was it just another move in another endless game where the people who matter least pay the highest price? He was silent for a long time. Then, what would you have me do? I don't know. But I know Lily is drawing pictures of dragons to protect treasure that doesn't exist anymore. I know she barely talks. I know she's 9 years old and she's already learned that the people you love disappear without warning. Took a breath. At some point, someone has to stop playing the game. If I stop, they'll see it as weakness. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see it as strength. He left without responding. But the next morning, the news reported that the Ashford organization had pulled back from several contested territories, citing a focus on legitimate business interests. Patterson told me later that Dominic had spent 3 hours on the phone with his captains, convincing them this wasn't surrender, just repositioning. I didn't know if it would work. But it was a start. The retaliation came anyway. Not immediately. The Morettis waited, watching to see if the pullback was genuine. Then they struck where it would hurt most. They hit the medical supply chain Ashford had established for families like mine. Families who couldn't afford insurance but needed medication anyway. 2 trucks hijacked. Thousands of dollars of supplies stolen or destroyed. Lily was with me when Ashford got the news. We were doing homework at the dining table, her bent over a geography worksheet, when he walked in with Patterson behind him. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Get her out of here," he said to me. Not angry at me. Angry at everything, everyone, the whole broken system. "It's okay," I started. "Now." I took Lily to my room, closed the door, put on a movie she wouldn't watch. She sat on my bed, small and tense, staring at the screen without seeing it. "Are they going to hurt someone?" she asked quietly. I don't know. They always do. When Uncle Dominic looks like that, someone always gets hurt. I sat beside her. Sometimes people do bad things because they don't know how to do good things anymore. They forget there are other options. What if there aren't? There are always options. They're just harder to see. She looked at me then, her eyes too old, too knowing. You don't understand how it works. Maybe not. But I understand that more violence just makes more orphans. She flinched like I'd hit her. For a moment I thought I'd gone too far, pushed too hard. Then she leaned against me, her small body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for a year. I held her while she cried, and through the door, I could hear Ashford's voice, low and lethal, planning his response. I found him in the office downstairs after midnight. Patterson was gone, the building quiet except for the hum of servers and air conditioning. Dominic sat at the desk with files spread around him, plans being drawn, decisions being made. I have a better idea, I said from the doorway. He looked up, his eyes still cold from hours of strategic thinking. I'm not interested in mercy right now. Not mercy. Strategy. I walked in, closed the door. The Morettas hit your medical operation because they knew it would hurt. 'Cause it connects to me, to what you paid for. They're trying to make you look weak for helping people. And they succeeded. So prove them wrong. Don't retaliate with violence. Retaliate with more help. I leaned against the desk. Double the medical operations. Triple them. Make it so public, so visible, that they can't touch it without looking like monsters. Use your legitimate businesses to create something they can't destroy without destroying their own reputation. That's not how this works. It could be. He stood, pacing to the window. They'll see it as weakness. They'll push harder. Let them push. You'll have the moral high ground. Their own people will start questioning why they're attacking medicine for sick kids. Followed him. You want to protect your family's legacy. Build something Lily can be proud of. Build something that doesn't require more funerals. You're asking me to change everything. I'm asking you to evolve. There's a difference. He stared out at the city for a long time. Then, if this fails, then you tried something new. That's more than most people can say. 3 days later, the Ashford Foundation announced a partnership with County General Hospital. Free medication programs. Mobile clinics in underserved neighborhoods. Everything public, everything documented, everything impossible to attack without looking like you were hurting the poor. The Morettas stayed quiet. Not because they wanted to, because they couldn't make a move without losing their own people's support. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. My father died on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Peacefully, Angela said, in his sleep, no pain. I was with him. I'd been sitting beside his bed, reading aloud from the newspaper like I did every morning, when his breathing just stopped. I don't remember calling for Angela. Don't remember her checking his pulse, making the official pronouncement. I just remember sitting there, holding his hand, feeling the warmth leave it while the sun came up outside the window. Dominic appeared within the hour. I never asked how he knew. Patterson probably, or one of the cameras, or maybe he just understood that death had its own gravity in this building. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was soft in a way I'd never heard before. I nodded, couldn't speak, couldn't look away from my father's face. He was a good man. What he did for my sister. He stopped. The world has too few men like him. He never wanted credit. Never wanted anything. My voice came out broken. He just helped because it was right. I know. That's why his debt could never be repaid. Dominic paused. But I tried anyway. The funeral was small. Just me, Angela, Patterson, and Dominic. Lily had asked to come. Dominic had tried to refuse, but she'd insisted with surprising force. She stood beside me at the graveside, holding my hand, 9 years old and understanding loss better than most adults ever would. After everyone else left, she stayed with me by the grave. Does it get easier? She asked. Missing them? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. Okay. She squeezed my hand. I'll remember to ask. I moved out of the penthouse 2 weeks after the funeral. Not far. Dominic owned the building, and he'd converted one of the smaller apartments on a lower floor into something livable. My space, my rules, but still protected. I started working again, not at the care facility. I couldn't go back there, but at one of the new medical clinics the foundation had opened. The pay was better, the work more structured, the impact more visible. Lily came by after school most days. We'd do homework together, or I'd teach her to cook the meals my mother had taught me. Simple things. Empanadas, arroz con pollo, tres leches cake that never quite came out right but tasted like home anyway. Dominic visited rarely. But when he did, he'd sit at my small kitchen table and eat whatever I'd made, and sometimes, not often but sometimes, he'd talk about things that weren't business or strategy or violence. One evening, after Lily had gone home and the apartment was quiet, he said, "You changed everything." I was washing dishes, my hands in warm soapy water. "I didn't do anything. You made me see differently. Made me question whether the game was worth playing." He paused. "The Morettas requested a meeting yesterday. They want to negotiate territories, establish boundaries. Real ones." I turned to look at him. Because of the foundation. Because of everything. Because I stopped responding the way they expected. Because my people started believing there was another option. He met my eyes. Because you refused to let me be only one thing. You were never only one thing. No. But I'd forgotten that. He left shortly after, back to his kingdom on the top floor. But something had shifted. The debt that had brought us together, my father saving his sister, me saving his nephew, had transformed into something else. Something that didn't have a name but felt like family. 6 months after my father's death, Dominic called me to his office. Real office this time, the one downtown where he ran his legitimate businesses. Lily was with me. Summer break, she'd become my shadow. "I want to make something official," he said, sliding papers across the desk. "The medical supply operation you suggested. The clinics. All of it. I'm establishing it as a formal foundation, separate from my other operations." I picked up the papers, scanning the legal text. "This is a lot of money. It's a lot of need." He looked at Lily, who was sitting in a chair by the window, reading a book. "I want her to inherit something worth inheriting. And I want her to know that the man who raised her built more than he destroyed. You're doing this for her. I'm doing it for both of you. You reminded me what matters." He pulled out another document. "And I want you to run it." I looked up sharply. "What?" "The foundation needs a director. Someone who understands what it's like to need help, who won't forget why it exists." He leaned back. "Someone I trust. Someone who's already proven they'll sacrifice everything for what's right." "I'm not qualified. You're the only person qualified." His voice was firm. "You saved my nephew with no training and no backup. You saved Lily from drowning in grief. You saved me from becoming the thing I hated most." He pushed the papers closer. "Say yes." I looked at Lily, who'd stopped pretending to read and was watching me with bright, hopeful eyes. Looked at Dominic, who'd terrified me 6 months ago and now felt like the brother I'd never had. "Yes," I said. "I'll do it." The foundation launched publicly in September. News coverage, ribbon cutting, politicians showing up to smile for cameras. I hated every second of the attention, but Dominic had insisted. Visibility was protection, he said. The more public the operation, the harder it would be for anyone to attack. He was right. The Morettas stayed away. Other families started copying the model, establishing their own foundations, competing to look the most legitimate. Crime didn't disappear, it never would, but it shifted, evolved. My apartment filled with thank you cards from families who'd received help. Photos of kids who'd gotten medicine they needed, surgeries they couldn't afford, futures they'd thought were impossible. Lily kept every card, organized them in binders, treated them like the treasure they were. 53 people this month, she'd announce proudly. Uncle Dominic says next month will be more. She'd started calling me Aunt Maya. Not because anyone asked her to, just naturally the way family names appear when they fit. I didn't correct her. I didn't want to. One evening, Dominic and I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights come on as the sun set. He'd brought wine, expensive stuff I couldn't pronounce, and we'd been talking about nothing and everything. Do you regret it? Yes. Changing everything. Walking away from the violence. Sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. But then I see Lily smile. See the foundation's numbers. See you building something that will outlast all of us. He looked at me. And I remember why it mattered. My father would be proud. Of both of us. He should be. Dominic raised his glass. To good men who made difficult choices. And to the women who refused to let their sacrifices be for nothing. I touched my glass to his. To family. However we find it. The threat never completely disappeared. The Morettas honored the truce, but there were always others. Families who saw Ashford's transformation as weakness, who tested the boundaries, who pushed to see what would happen. Dominic handled it. Quietly, efficiently, with violence when necessary but restraint when possible. The balance he'd learned to strike, thanks to a conversation in a kitchen at midnight, thanks to a 9-year-old girl who'd needed him to be better. I learned to live with the security. The cameras, the guards, the knowledge that my life would never be completely normal again. It was the price of the world I'd entered, the cost of the family I'd chosen. But some nights, when Lily was asleep on my couch after another marathon homework session, when Dominic stopped by with dinner from whatever restaurant he was meeting at, when Angela called to check on me even though she'd stopped being my father's nurse months ago, those nights I understood. This was what my father had created 23 years ago when he chose not to call the police. This strange, complicated, sometimes violent family that protected each other because the world wouldn't. The pharmacy bill Dominic had paid wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment when invisible threads became visible, when debts acknowledged became bonds impossible to break. A year after my father's death, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates and the words he helped. Dominic had wanted to add more, had offered to pay for marble and grand monuments, but I'd refused. My father wouldn't have wanted grand. He'd have wanted the truth. Lily stood beside me, 12 now, taller, less haunted. She'd started therapy. Dominic had hired the best, naturally, and slowly, carefully she was healing. Still had nightmares. Still went quiet sometimes, lost in memories. But she laughed more now. Smiled easier. Tell me the story again, she said. The story of how her uncle and I met. How a pharmaceutical bill became a bridge between worlds. So I told her. About the pharmacy, the humiliation, the stranger who paid without asking. About learning that my father's kindness had echoed across decades. That saving one girl had created ripples that eventually saved me. It's like a fairy tale, Lily said. But real. Better than a fairy tale. Harder. But better. We stood in silence for a while. The wind moving through the trees, the city humming in the distance. Then Lily squeezed my hand. Uncle Dominic says the foundation helped 500 families last month. He says we're opening 2 more clinics next year. She looked up at me. Your dad would be proud. He would be. I touched the headstone, cool granite under my fingers. He'd say it was what good men do. Help even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what you do. I learned from the best. The legend grew over time the way legends do. The story of the Mafia boss who paid a pharmacy bill, who protected the daughter of the man who'd once saved his sister. People told it different ways. Some versions had me being kidnapped, some had Dominic falling in love with me, some had dramatic shootouts and last-minute rescues. The truth was simpler and more complicated. A debt acknowledged. Family formed. A choice to be better than the world expected. I still ran the foundation. Lily, now 15, volunteered there after school, organizing supply drives and talking to families with the quiet authority of someone who understood loss. Dominic had shifted most of his operations to legitimate business, though rumors said he still had connections to the darker side. I didn't ask. Some things were better left unspoken. My apartment had become a gathering place. Angela for coffee on Sunday mornings. Patterson for weekly briefings that had somehow turned into friendship. Lily for homework and life advice and the kind of conversation you only have with people who've seen your worst and stayed anyway. And Dominic, stopping by when his world got too heavy, when he needed to remember why he'd chosen the harder path. We'd sit in my small kitchen, so different from his penthouse, and just talk. About Lily's school struggles. About foundation finances. About nothing that mattered and everything that did. The bill had been paid years ago. But the debt, the real debt, the one that had nothing to do with money, would never be settled. Because that's what family was. An endless owing, an endless giving. A balance that shifted constantly and never quite came due. I thought about that sometimes, late at night when the city was quiet. How a single act of kindness could echo across years. How mercy given freely created bonds stronger than blood. My father saved a girl bleeding in an emergency room. I saved a boy dying in a parking garage. Dominic paid a pharmacy bill for a woman who couldn't afford her father's medication. And from those small moments, scattered across time, a family was built. Imperfect, complicated, sometimes dangerous. But ours. The legend said a mafia boss paid a bill and changed a life. The truth was better. We all paid bills for each other in ways large and small, until the debts tangled into something that looked like love. And in the end, that was worth more than any legend could capture.